Not very vulnerable because the invitation was take your journals and tell the story of what the work has been for you, which was very scary because I thought my journals are for me and myself, and it's recording in raw form what the Lord tells me, and then I record it in that. And I wasn't thinking I would expose it to the world, especially when I'm still around. I was thinking maybe sometimes when I'm gone, these stories can then be shared or read. But it just felt like I was going to be exposing my nakedness before people by writing this book. And then it became almost instructional that this is a testimony to just share what the Lord has done. How the Lord has called, how He has led, the words He has said, and the outcome of some of the things that He has said. So as I began to write that, it actually began to speak to me because it led me to my journals from the time that I was a teenager and just reviewing that. And it opened my eyes because I began to see some of the things God had told me like 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and they've come to pass. And I hadn't been conscious because I hadn't been intentional about remembering what He said and what I wrote down. Because the initial thing that drew me to writing my journals was to debrief with myself. Like coming to the end of a day and feeling, wow, it's been intense, or some of the things that I've gone through. So writing them meant I can empty that and go to bed empty, so that the following day I'm not carrying those thoughts. It was more like debriefing with myself. So for the Lord to be inviting me to those journals, like go back to them, tell these stories, and publish them, it was quite an invitation.
There's something very powerful about journaling, isn't there?
Yeah.
Some of us find it really easy. Some of us find it a real struggle. Some of us just jot bullet points. Some write more pouring out thoughts. And yet your point of going back, seeing where God has answered prayer and giving Him thanks, seeing where things are maybe still to come, seeing where He has guided or directed us, and then here you are 10, 20, 30 years along, and what the fulfillment of His promise and His faithfulness. So I don't know if you find journaling something easy or not, but maybe there's something in that, isn't there? And the other thing that I've noticed very much reading the book is the honesty. Because like you said, it was like exposing yourself and your vulnerability when God said, go back and write your journaling into a book. But you're very honest in this book. It's very direct at times, and honest as well in the times where it didn't go as God probably wanted, maybe because of there was a couple of times where like you were like, no, I want this, and then slowly that surrender comes through. There's so much in here, and I don't want to just reread the book out loud, but if I said, what's one or two stories in here that for you are pivotal things, or the bits that you go, that's where God worked in my life the most, or it's all important, but these are the two headlines or something. What would you say of any of those for yourself?
I think one of the things that has shaped me is when accepting the theology of suffering, and almost accepting the theology of suffering by expecting it, that we will suffer. So long as we have decided to be aligned with God, the world does not accept us. And even the fact that we have found ourselves in existence, there will be things that we will love and then we lose them. And that causes pain. Or there will be things that we would love and want to have, but we will not have. So walking with the realization that we will suffer. And I remember when that became a reality for me, and I think I tell that story, I was in Sudan. And Sudan is a rough country. It can be rough. And was at the airport, really bruised, really feeling broken, both physically, emotionally, and socially. We had gone to a community outside of the city to do medical work. And we were using medical work as a door opener so that we can walk alongside women who had been so brutally abused and harassed in the Darfur area by the Muslim communities. So we felt clearly the Lord was telling us to take a week, lay our hands on those women, come alongside them, and pray in the kingdom of God. So I was in Ethiopia at that time, so went to Sudan, connected with the Sudan Council of Churches. We formed a team and we went to the Darfur area, and we were going to be fasting and praying the whole week, doing medical work in the tent, inviting the women, and as we pray with them, as we lay our hands on them, as we examine them, praying in that healing, that restoration, but also healing of the land as we are there. So we came to the end of the week and we were exhausted, both emotionally and hearing the stories. And as we were coming out, we were stopped at a border check. And the police who were there recognized that I wasn't Sudanese and called me out, told me to step aside. And the doctors who were with us stepped forward to want to protect me, like, no, she's one of us, and she was with us. And they became so brutal, they actually opened fire and shot in the shoulder of one of the doctors. And it's when I realized, wow, this is intense. And they were ordered back into the car, and they were told to leave. And I remember watching them driving away from this post and leaving me still wearing my scrubs at the side of the road with these people whose stories I've been hearing the whole week of what they do to women and how they regard women in that culture. And sort of thinking, Lord, where are you? Like, this is not happening. Yeah. So it was 3 days later, as I was at the airport and sort of looking back over what has happened to me over the last 3 days and sort of asking God, like, did this need to be part of my story? Like, could this have been prevented? And I was sort of looking toward the wall because I didn't want our fellow passengers to sort of see the bruising and all of that. So I was sort of protecting myself. And it was almost like as loud as it's coming from the wall, like, count it all joy. Like, count it all joy that I have invited you into the fellowship of my suffering. So it led me to just begin to examine the life of Christ, or to examine those that have desired to know Christ, and realize when he actually invites us to be his disciples, he clearly says it's costly, like, count the cost. So it's almost like if you're not feeling the cost, then are you actually following? Or are you compromised or settling? Or yeah. So I think for me, just at that Khartoum airport and realizing, wow, there will be pain. Like, Florence, prepare yourself that there will be pain, and when you think it has cost or there has been pain, there will be more pain. Because unless you don't want to love and you don't want to be involved, then you can protect your heart from pain. But so long as you're given to love and to be part of a change process, then there will be pain. And so that theology sort of settled in my spirit. I would say the other thing that was very defining for me was the first time that I heard the Lord speak in an audible voice. It was after I had done all that surrender. I knew I was going to go to the mission field. I had totally given myself. And I was at a coastal area, and hearing the Lord speak to me about life in abundance that I want you to establish for me an organization whose name is going to be taken from John 10:10, and the vision of the organization is going to be taken from Psalms 96:3. And these were verses that I hadn't like a recollection, like I didn't know. So rushing back to my hotel room and writing those things down and looking at the verses and beginning to realize what has just the Lord invited me to. Almost like saying the end at the beginning, and almost like, yes, you had me, now let's walk. And realizing it's not going to be a 1 year, 2 year, or 3 year. It's actually now been 27 years since 1993, and he's still building on that. So being able to look and be reminded, this is what the Lord said, and this is like the road. Like, this is where we are going to travel. This is the life mission. So what is it that I'm doing that is not establishing what he asked me to establish? And what does this really look like? Because when he said establish, I was just thinking of a small nonprofit in Kenya, like, period. And then looking back and realizing, wow, it's been 12 countries in Africa and 2 in the Caribbean, and all the other details that go with that, and realizing really it isn't me who has established. It's almost like God showed me what he wants to do and invited me to join him in that. And then it meant continue seeking me, like, let's do this together. Yeah. Like, yours is follow in obedience, follow in trust. And I'll continue to bring all the pieces together, and it will work out. So I think those two have really been defining, because I mean, there are times that I've come to him and said, no, you told me to establish, so it should be easy. But then realizing, no, it's not going to be easy, because it's the kingdom that is counter to the kingdom of this world.
It's the struggle, the suffering in this broken world that he's called us to be his disciples and to partner with him in the gospel, isn't it?
Yes.
I was just looking up Psalm 96, verse 3, declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all people. And we're called to do that, aren't we?
Yes.
And I must confess, with a lot of conversations I had with people just in the last 48 hours, 2 of the few pastoral conversations I had both included struggle questions about suffering.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? How do we live that? How do we support others? How do we cope with it ourselves in our own lives? And there is much in your book that talks about that. And then I think with that journey daily, surrendering to God.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
You might have been asked to write the book and God said, share your vulnerability in your journals. Did you have at any point, do you have now a hope for the reader when we read the book? What your hope is that people would hear, see, respond, use it for? Is there anything at all that you're hoping for from it?
So it's, I do a lot of mentoring, so working alongside people who feel God has called them, and they just want to see what does it look like to work with him, to hear him, to walk in obedience, to involve others. So just a mentoring of, I've had God say this, but how do I bring it about? So for me, it's putting down how the Lord has discipled me, and should it be something that somebody reading will feel discipled, then to God be the glory. But I think it's also, it's been very interesting. A lot of people read my book and they come and say, I just saw myself in your book. Like, I felt like you were talking to me. So almost like realizing the Spirit of God at work is the same Spirit. And as we testify of what he has done, then he uses that testimony to to speak to others.
Yeah.
Like it's a living word. The power of testimony is incredible.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And how the Lord will use it or interpret it based on the context that that person finds it, it's really the work of the Holy Spirit. Because I just think of the Gospels. The Gospels is basically the testimony of the disciples of what they saw Jesus do, whether it's stories or they're reporting events. And it becomes a living word because it's the doing of God that's being narrated and put on record, and it begins to speak to us in our situations. And so I feel that's what it is. Just bearing testimony, being obedient, and however the Lord will use it, then I have done my part.
Just 1 second, Janet. I love the fact at the end of each chapter you have some questions for us and a reflection time, because it encourages the reader when you've read it and looked at it, and all too often we can go, oh, that was fab, and just move on. But there's space to respond, because whether it's through someone else, whether it's just on a one-to-one with the Lord, whether it's in a massive big event, God works through others and works in this world for us to respond at all times. And I love that element of it.
Yeah.
Janet, sorry.
Well, I've read a book, so I can give you feedback. Timely feedback. First of all, it's no surprise that you chose Abraham's life, and reading your book and seeing, knowing how you started and working with God and how you prepared yourself to listen to God, and as you went ahead, as your times go on, you understood the voice of the Lord and carrying you through that, and also understanding that Romans 8:28, for those who love the world, everything works together for their good.
Good. Yes.
And so that in times when problems pile up, is where God show up. I mean, you can talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. You can talk about Daniel. I think I see you through that, reading that. I've read it about 5 times.
Wow.
I couldn't put it down. To just listening and with Abraham, when Abraham started, he didn't understand the voice of the Lord. He started, he did. But then going ahead, finding challenges and trying to learn. Sometimes he failed. He lied. That's not my wife. It was the fear that comes into our way. Again, going back to Romans 8:28. They will come. But then if you know that the Lord is speaking to you, have the courage to go ahead as you did. And that encouraged me so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
For those on live stream, Janet just has said she's read this 5 times, and just the encouragement and how God speaks in different ways throughout that, and God is for us. Anne, have you got a question?
Could we know the title?
Yeah, the book is called The Pursuit of His Calling. I can email it out to people. We can do you have some copies with you?
They're actually on Amazon.
On Amazon. You can order it on Amazon. The Pursuit of His Calling, Dr Florence Muindi. Have I said that right?
Yes, close.
Close. Every time I say it slightly different. My apologies.
Muindi.
Muindi.
Yes.
Dr Florence Muindi. Has anyone else? Any questions? Susanna?
What if we get it wrong because we do?
What if we get it wrong because we do? Excellent question. I'm glad that Florence is answering that one. Thank you.
And I would say I also want to pass that to everyone, because what if we get it wrong because we do? I would say the more tragic is, what if we do nothing? In the fear of we may get it wrong. Because if we do nothing, then we come to the end of this life and we'll never come this way again. The dependency on God and allowing Him to even own our mistakes and use them to work together for good for us, then enables Him to be God. Because I do know there's some things that will come into our lives that are meant for bad by the enemy. But the surprising thing is God is able to take all of that, even our mistakes, and cause that to work together for our good. Yeah. So it's not wasted, ever wasted. Yeah. Yeah.
And I would say absolutely that Genesis verse, what the enemy means for evil, sometimes God uses for his good or for our good and his glory. Absolutely. To pick up Janet's verse of Romans 8, in all things God works for the good of those who love him. And God has plans and purposes for us. I think getting it wrong is when we go, Jesus, I don't believe in you and I'm not going to trust you. When we say, I do believe in you and I trust you, and we take a step forward in faith, he blesses that. Sometimes things have a few obstacles, sometimes of our doing, sometimes of just the world and the enemy's doing, but he will bless that if we are doing it in his name and for his glory. He will use it in some form or other. And it then poses the question, what is wrong? Because, screen didn't work this morning, we had bother with the sound, couldn't get the live stream working right at the beginning of this. Is that wrong? Not at all. We carry on. And so I think sometimes we go, oh goodness, it's gone wrong. And then a week, a month, a year, 10 years later, you meet someone or you hear someone who goes, when you said, when I was at that event, God touched me, and then you find they're doing this or that for Jesus, or something of kingdom work happened. I wonder if sometimes it's the wrong question. Yeah. It's like, okay, Lord, I'm really nervous, I'm really scared, I don't know. Oh my goodness me, he's calling me. I've made this covenant as a teenager on my knees. What does that mean? And there are times on borders, on whatever, where we're attacked by the enemy. Yeah. But I think, like you said as well, if we're not under attack, I don't mean that necessarily physically, like some of our brothers and sisters persecuted elsewhere, but if life's too easy, and if I wonder, are we actually stepping out in faith for God? Because when we're not doing anything exciting, the enemy just leaves us alone. When we're doing stuff for the kingdom, the enemy will trip us up. We'll regularly go, have I done it wrong? And then we have to remember, no, I stand in the name of Jesus and do it. And it's okay, even though some people in the world may go, that was wrong. In God's eyes, it's not, because we're doing it because we love him and we serve him.
Yeah, I'm just reminded of Joseph. And finding himself in Egypt and being able to look back, and probably if we could have helped it, we would have protected him from his brothers and sort of brought him home and locked him in a safe space so that he's not sold to Egypt. But then we would have been like directly countering the will of God and his plans for what is to come. So I think I agree with you. It's just so much based on we trust God, that he's God. And all things will work together for good for us. And he's in charge. And sometimes it feels like he's not, but he is. Yes, and he's able to make all things work together for good. I honestly can't wait until we get to heaven and look back and realize some of the things that we thought were so wrong, how they were the very things that lifted us to our purpose, or enabled us to, almost like enabled our soul to mature, to worship God. Like without those things, we would have fallen so far short of worshiping God. Like what I needed to be broken, I'm such a hard person. Like what I needed to be broken, the Lord would allow that by his grace, because he loves me, that I may be broken.
Do I surrender it to the knife and the fire? Anybody else got? Anne?
Well, something rather personal I want to say, but I did want to say a huge thank you to Florence, because I hope I'm going to explain this right, but you know how sometimes you can look back and you can see a thread of the Lord's guidance through your life. And something you said just now and in your sermon this morning totally illuminated something for me, and I want to thank you. So 40 years ago, we very sadly, in the week before Christmas, we lost our fourth child, who died as what we call a cot death. And in my devastation afterwards, we had recently moved here from Ipswich, and we had had some wonderful friends there. And among them was a vicar and his wife, who were great friends. And the husband, Claude, had been through terrible suffering. He had had a brain tumour that he'd had massive surgery, so he ended up with kind of very, very partial vision. He was a great artist, and yes, it was devastating for him. And in my need, after losing my son, I so wanted to see Claude because he had walked this path of suffering. So we went up and we stayed overnight. And his wife arranged that Claude and I would just have this little talk together. And I was expecting great illumination, great help. And all he said to me was, Anne, it's the way of the cross. And all these years I've held on to that as being something very profound, but something that I didn't quite understand.
Mm.
And when you spoke today, and I had to write it down because that's the way I remember it, and when you said, count it all joy, that you've been invited into the fellowship of my suffering, it suddenly makes sense, and you put a light on it. I can't tell you all those years later. And so I just want to say a huge thank you. That was God speaking to me through you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. I appreciate you saying that. Yeah. I just think of like the cross. The cross is such an emblem of shame and suffering, and it's bad. It's something bad, like the cross. Yet that's what we identify with. That's our identity as Christians. That's even what sometimes we wear. That's what we put on our churches. So it's an emblem of shame and suffering, and we sort of sometimes lie to ourselves that by entering through that path of the cross, we're coming into a palace or into being protected from any suffering. But that's what he invites us to, like, count the costs, take up the cross, and follow me.
A daily choice of surrendering to God. Ian.
Just, have you found that God sometimes closes doors? Because I've had that experience a few times. Once, many years ago, I applied for a job hundreds of miles away, and I was given an interview, and I went all the way to that town, strange town, and the interview process started, and I went out for a walk around the town, and I got this very clear voice, this is not the place for you. So I just withdrew from the interview process.
Have you ever found God closes doors?
Yeah.
There you go.
He does, especially in the area of partnerships. Like you sort of feel like this is a partnership that we can be part of, and you begin to think, if we are part of this partnership, it will solve our needs in all of this, and almost like God, like, open this door. And the Lord just says no, and you do what you can, and it just refuses to come through. So I think, especially in that area, in some ways, just almost like God communicating, it's not about doing, it's not about the activities, or are you beginning to build your kingdom? So just that surrender to, no, that door is closed. So that area of partnerships. But I also think, like the way we've ended up in the countries where we are, there could have been other places that we could have gone that were easier, but the doors were just not open. So him closing those doors to protect us from going offside and staying on the path. But I think, yeah, I think I can count a lot of ways that the Lord has closed doors to protect me, and allow me to bang my head on that closed door, like trying to push, and sort of like, when are you ever going to learn that this is for your good? Like, yeah, come on this way. Yeah, yes.
It's often when we look back, isn't it, we can see, okay, I see that, Lord, why you closed that door. At that moment, we're sometimes quite frustrated or cross or try and do it our way.
Yeah.
But it's trusting in those times, isn't it, to let go of what we think, because we only see from our little perspective, where God sees the whole picture. And again, linking in with something we said earlier, what happens at that moment or that closed door, we might not understand for 5 or 10 years, or even in our lifetime. But it's trusting, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jamie.
Yeah, I've also a question about fasting, because that's something which I find very difficult to do. I think it's getting into the sort of right place, the right space for that.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering if there's any tips.
A question about fasting and getting into that space, and any tips.
There's something interesting that the Bible says about prayer and fasting, that there are some things that you will not come into unless by prayer and fasting. And I think for me that was the encouragement. What is it that the Lord would desire to invite me into, but desires that I almost like I be disciplined into that, and wanting therefore to get into that level. Like there's some things that will not happen until we get into that. I think it's just beginning small, beginning little, and I think once you see the power of it, then you cannot stop, because it's almost like after you've tasted the sweetness of that fellowship with Him in that submission, then you want it, and you want more of it. My husband fasts like during Lent, and different programs, but during Lent he just fasts from sugars, from whites, like white bread or anything white is off, milk, and just like takes the time of Lent going through that. And I think what that has done for him, it's helped him to break from dependencies of things that he feels he cannot do without. Then he sort of disciplines the body like, yes, you can do without these things. There are people who may just take like a day or several days, or there are times that a problem just comes our way and we realize the Lord is inviting us to fast and fight until we get a breakthrough in this. I think the most powerful for us has been corporate fasting. And we do part of that like at the beginning of the year, sort of just to say for the next 21 days, we're inviting whoever in the Life in Abundance family to join in a corporate time of prayer. It's not compulsory, but if your hand is up, join us and we will go through this together. And then as we hear the Lord for what He's inviting us to pray together about the next day, then we're sharing those. So just feeling like you're doing it together. So it could be a prayer group or a home study group that you just feel like, why don't we take some time and pray for these particular things, or there's leadership change in the church. How about we take time to pray for what is happening? And then as you become part of what God is doing and see the outcome because you are part of that, it just encourages you to like, oh, I wish I could do this more, like see what happens when we pray. So I don't know if that helps. Yeah, but Jonathan likes to fast and pray, so maybe he can just share what has been his practice.
Yeah, I mean, before I started, I thought fasting would be really difficult. But then I got into the rhythm of doing it every Monday. So I will probably fast until maybe till about 5 o'clock. And actually I find I can just now go through the day without thinking I want to eat or have anything. It's that sort of that sense of something you accumulate, oh, I want a biscuit or I want something, and you just stop yourself from doing that. And I think, yeah, once you develop that discipline and just that combination of prayer and fasting together, I think it just allows me in that time, that space to focus more on God. And the great thing with Life Abundance is we do it on a Monday where you think, oh, everybody else in Life Abundance. It's not just me today, but the whole NIA family are fasting. So that sense of doing it together.
Yeah, there's something about doing it with others, isn't there? And I'm wondering, it's come up a few times just in different random things and conversations, whether it's something actually we just need to look at as a church or have a couple of teachings on it, or maybe some home groups look at it. It's really, it's biblical.
Yes.
It's really hard because there's so many other things that can buy into that, oh, I can lose weight, oh, I can do this, oh, aren't I good, or whatever, oh, let's just have a biscuit. That makes it harder, and sometimes I think puts up more barriers.
Yeah. And I just wanted to say the first 3 days are the most difficult.
Okay.
But once you've broken through the first 3 days, or the fourth day, you just, like it's green pastures from then on.
They'll hold you to that,
So if you're committing to 21 days, you're going to want to give up on day 2 or day 3, and then, so just keep going. Yes.
Lots of biblical references as well, worth looking at, I think, if that's something that the Lord is nudging you about. Any other questions? Anybody? Janet?
So, Florence, I would like to, I've read a book, but I want to ask you personally, face-to-face, that, in Africa, a doctor is, just like a demigod. They're worshipped. And then you had your degree, you had to go through a lot to pass. I don't know whether the lecturers make it so hard that fewer doctors will be churned out. I don't know. But it is a privilege. Yet, you had all this glory. You could have just said, well, I'm just going to practice. But you chose to just serve the Lord with your talent and what you got.
Yeah.
And how did you deal with that?
Yeah. I thank God in His wisdom called me before I became a doctor. So like going to medical school was to equip me to fulfill the call. Other than going to medical school and I realized I have this and then I want to give it back. So from the very start, there was just clarity that being called to the poor and the vulnerable, my heart is totally broken. So Lord, how do we do this? And the Lord making it possible for me to join medical school and be trained, and realizing that was part of the equipping. But I want to say, after now finishing medical school, doors opened for me to be able to train in other disciplines. So initially wanted to do pediatrics, and the Lord closed the door and sort of led me on now to public health. And I was thinking, I will do public health, and then I still have my opportunity to get a scholarship with the government to do pediatrics. And when I did public health, I realized, no, I actually don't need pediatrics. This is what the Lord wanted me to be equipped in. And then on to disaster management, being in Geneva, and then going back. I think what was difficult at that time was being offered a UN job to lead a country program in Botswana, and looking at what would be paid and beginning to think, I could take this salary and then sponsor evangelists to go and do what I would have done instead of me going. And that makes sense. It's almost like I have my profession. It's good stewardship to use it. You begin to justify. And the Lord just saying, no, I don't need your money. It's you I need. And it's your obedience that I am calling on. So we did now resign from our work and go and work in a people group. But what almost became embarrassing was coming back into the city and meeting my colleagues who are being very successful and their children are going to the right institutions, and they're buying property and driving the right cars and status, and we're coming and smelling of cow dung coming from the villages, or just not having it together. And even some people calling me aside and giving me counsel, like, what's wrong with you? What happened to you? So that was difficult. I think, it's comparing myself to what could have been, and here I am, like the way down, and they're going up. So that was difficult. And just you begin to compare as a professional, like what you could have been. But amazing that God doesn't write short stories. He seems to make them long, because now I look back and see some of the things that I would have wished for and realize they have been given to me, but being given to me as a blessing. This was just like last year. Last year, I was invited to be, and I'm saying this with humility just to glorify God, I was invited to take a chancellor position for a prestigious university. And it was a question of, like, why me? Because there were people who were wanting that and had positioned themselves on how they can work their way to eventually get there. And then it just handed off to me, and I'm not even seeking it. And yes, it's being given. But if it was given to me because I had worked for it, it would maybe give me pride or make me feel like I've attained it, I have a right to it. But when it's given to you, then it's almost like, then the Lord is giving me this for his glory. So what is the calling in occupying this? I said that to just say, it's easy to look at the story in the short interim, but when we see like years later, like 40 years later, and realize some of the things that people went after have not been a blessing to them, but these things have been handed to you, and they're not a threat to you. They're not corrupting your spirit.
As we let go of things, so God multiplies.
Yes.
As we give our 5 loaves and 2 fish, so he feeds whatever and whoever.
Yes.
Florence, it's been wonderful hearing a bit more, and some of your story and your inspiration, and how God has led and provided and equipped. We would love to pray for you. So are there a few things that you could just summarise briefly that we could then gather around and pray for stuff going on for you in your work, in your calling, personally, or whatever you feel comfortable to share with us?
Yeah. Over the years, the Lord has prescribed to us what the establishment of life in abundance would look like. So the 12 countries in Africa, the 2 in the Caribbean, the 3 support offices, the 2 training centers, the aviation company. And that has come to pass. And we now have a CEO who is overseeing that. So in a way, I feel like I'm in my transition. And I was hoping that I could retire. And then I feel like it's a call upon a call, like a new horizon. Just what Jonathan was saying, you think you've climbed a mountain, and then you come to the top and realize, wow, the Lord is inviting me yonder. So I have begun to see that horizon, and I almost feel like I'm in my final quarter. And something that's really been an encouragement to me is Paul saying, I want to know Christ. And, just thinking like, Paul, you didn't know Christ? Like, we thought you know Christ, and he's coming to a point where he's saying, I just want to know Christ. And that's what I'm feeling right now. Like, I just want to know Christ in my final quarter. I want to finish well. I want to run a good race that is ahead. And I feel what has been done is but a foundation. I feel what the Lord is inviting us to will need his anointing, his wisdom, his guidance more submission, more brokenness. So it's just to pray that we may see clearly and that we may run a good race. Just that picture of you can run a marathon and run the 24 miles.
26.1.
But that final dash,
Yeah.
as you come into the arena, it really is the marathon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
feel like we're coming into
Okay,
that.
that final bit.
Yeah, so.
Okay. Are you comfortable if we move to the floor and
Yes.
gather round people and we'll pray and we'll stop the live stream at this point, but please do be praying for Florence. Do grab her book. You can get it on Amazon and I can email out the exact details if that's helpful as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Anita.
Let's stand down there and pray.